Thank you. So we've all seen over the past several years how profound these devices can be at changing our day-to-day behaviors. And so over the past several years, what I've wanted to look at is how do these companies that start as toys, that start out as easily dismissed little features, how do these companies become these world-changing behemoths, touching the lives of hundreds of millions, if not billions of users, and making hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars, right? You know the usual suspects. We just mentioned a few of them, like Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and WhatsApp. In the enterprise space, companies like Slack. What is it about these companies that makes them so able to change people's day-to-day habits and behaviors? So what we're going to do today is to try and understand those patterns so that we can learn from the best in the business, right? If you wanted to learn how to be a fantastic swimmer, you're not going to go ask your schlubby neighbor down the street. You're going to go talk to Michael Phelps, right? If you wanted to learn how to invest, maybe you talk to Warren Buffett. If you wanted to learn how to be an amazing actor, maybe you talk to Keanu Reeves. Okay. Seeing if you're awake. All right, good. You're awake. Terrific. Okay. So if you want to figure out how to change user behavior, how to create customer habits, you want to look at the best in the business. And so that's what we're going to do today. So I spent several years writing this book, Hooked, How to Build Habit-Forming Products, and I taught a class at the Graduate School of Business at Stanford, at the design school there. So I'm going to distill down for you this high-level model that I've developed that can help all sorts of companies. No matter what you're building, if your product requires repeat engagement, if your business model requires people to form these habits, I'm going to share with you a pattern to help you get that done. Now let's start with the definition of a habit, just so that we're all on the same page. What is a habit? When I use this word, what am I talking about? A habit is simply a behavior done with little or no conscious thought. It's about half of what you do every single day, day in and day out, is done purely out of habits. And I believe that we are on the precipice of an age where we can use these habits for good, right? I don't give this talk to Facebook and Instagram and WhatsApp and Slack and Google. They already know this stuff. I'm giving this talk to you, the people who are building products and services that would improve people's lives if they would just frickin' use the technology. So that's why I'm here today, is to help you build habits for good, to improve people's lives with these healthy habits, these healthy behaviors. And whether you're in the consumer space or enterprise space, doesn't matter. If your product requires repeat engagement, the same exact psychological rules apply. What you have to build into your product is called a hook. A hook is an experience designed to connect the user's problem to your product with enough frequency to form a habit. Let me say that again. A hook is an experience designed into the product that connects the user's problem with your solution, with your product, with enough frequency to form a habit. So what is a hook? Let's look at the 4 parts endemic to all of these habit-forming technologies. Every hook starts with a trigger to an action, a reward, and finally an investment. You can see there's this infinite loop here. So I'm going to walk you through these 4 basic elements, starting with triggers. Triggers are things that tell us what to do next. They cue our action. The first type of trigger is called an external trigger. An external trigger is something that tells you what to do next with some piece of information. Okay? Click here, buy now, play this, a friend telling you through word of mouth about this great new service you should try out. All examples of external triggers. Now, we in the startup community, we know all about these external triggers. We see these every day in our businesses, and we see them as consumers. But what companies don't think about enough, and what turns out to be absolutely critical to forming these long-term habits, is creating an association with what's called an internal trigger. An internal trigger is something that tells the user what to do next, but the information for what to do is stored as a memory or an association inside the user's head. So what we do when we're in a particular place, a certain situation, partaking in a certain routine, around certain people, and most frequently when we experience certain emotions, prompts us to action, tells us what to do next. Now, the most frequently occurring internal triggers are these emotions, but not just any emotion. They are specifically negative emotions. negative emotions. So what we do when we're feeling bored or lost or indecisive or lonely or uncertain, what we do when we experience these negative emotions prompts us to action, prompts us to look for relief with a solution. Now, if you don't believe me, let me share with you a study a few years ago that found that people suffering from depression check email more. People suffering from depression check email. I just saw 3 people put away their phones. What's going on there? Why do people suffering from depression check email more often? Well, it turns out psychologists determined that people suffering from clinical depression experience what they call negative valence states. They feel down more often than the rest of the population. And so what are they doing to boost their mood, to be taken out of those negative valence states? They're going online, they're checking their devices, they're looking at email more often than the rest of the population. But if we're honest with ourselves, we all do this, right? We all do this. Listen, folks, there is only one reason, and one reason only, that we use any product or service. One reason. That reason is only to modulate our mood, to make us feel something different. What app or website do we check when we're feeling lonely? Where do we go? Facebook, right? Somebody said Tinder? Also true. Different kind of loneliness, but also true. What about when we're feeling uncertain? Before we scan our brains to see if we know the answer to what we're looking for, what are we doing? We Google it. And what about when we're feeling bored? You know, between 2 and 4 o'clock in the afternoon, you have that big project you don't feel like working on. Where do you go instead? You go to YouTube, you go to Reddit, you look at the news, you look at stock prices, you check out sports scores. All of these products and services cater to this painful internal trigger of boredom. We don't like that sensation, and before our brains are processing why we're on these websites or why we're checking these apps, we already are scrolling and tapping. So what do we do about this? I told you can use this psychology to help build better products and services to help improve our users' lives. Well, how do we do that? It starts with fundamentally understanding what is your user's frequently occurring internal trigger. I can't tell you how many times in my consulting practice I meet with the product team and they tell me all the amazing whiz-bang technological things that their product can do. But when I say, okay, but what's the internal trigger? What's the itch? What would get this user to use this product habitually? They haven't a clue. They can't tell me. So you've got to be able to understand what that internal trigger is, and does it occur with sufficient frequency to attach your product's use to. Let's make this concrete. I want to show you a case study here. How many of you are Instagram users? Who here uses Instagram? A lot of people. Okay, terrific. So what made Instagram such a habit-forming product? By the way, you know, Instagram sold to Facebook. Remember how much Instagram sold for? $1 billion. And I remember when Instagram was sold, I used to live in Silicon Valley back then, everybody in Silicon Valley laughed. They said, oh, this stupid little, photo sharing service. God, Zuckerberg got creamed. What a stupid price he paid. $1 billion? That's ridiculous. There was a Wall Street bank a few months ago that tried to figure out the value of Instagram if it was separated from Facebook today. Anybody want to take a guess? $33 billion. Who had the last laugh there, right? Zuckerberg knew exactly what he was doing. So let's go back to Instagram. What made Instagram such a habit-forming product? Let's first look at the external triggers. You install the app, right? You've got the app icon on your home screen. That's an external trigger. And you start getting these notifications, right? These messages, these triggers to bring you back to use the app every time one of your friends does something on the social network, right? Those are all external triggers. Now let's talk about Instagram's internal triggers. Who said they use? Oh, Rand. I'm going to pick on Rand here. Rand, you said you use Instagram frequently. Do you remember the last thing that you took a picture of with Instagram, if it's suitable for work? Oh, okay, your friend's kid. Terrific. How old's your friend's kid?
6 weeks.
6 weeks. I am guessing that your friend's kid did not say, Rand, take a picture of me with Instagram, if he's only 6 weeks old, with his eyes, right? So how did Rand know that when he saw this moment in time, right, when he saw something that he wanted to capture, why did he know that that was a moment to take out his phone and open the Instagram app? Because Rand experienced this momentary feeling of this fear of losing the moment. That was the internal trigger. Now, when I talk about the moment, there's another company in the photography space. Think 30, 40 years ago. What company used to own the moment? Kodak, right? Does everybody remember the Kodak moment? Remember these schmaltzy commercials that Kodak ran when we were kids of, puppy dogs running through the grass? And children who would someday leave the empty nest. Remember that one commercial they always ran of grandma blowing out her last birthday candles? You know which commercial I'm talking about, right? Why did Kodak spend billions of dollars in advertising and almost 100 years teaching people about the Kodak moment? Because they wanted to create this association that when you see a moment like this in your life, capture it before it disappears with a Kodak camera. But what took Kodak 100 years and billions of dollars in advertising, Instagram did with 12 people in 18 months by teaching us users what the Instagram moment is all about. But Instagram does way more than the Kodak camera ever could because Instagram is also a social network. So even though I might start using the product to scratch this one itch around the fear of losing the moment, the more I pass through Instagram's hook, I begin to associate it with other internal triggers. When I'm seeking connection, when I'm bored, when I'm feeling FOMO. What's FOMO? Fear of missing out. Do you know that's a real word in the Merriam-Webster Dictionary as of 2 years ago? FOMO is a real English word now, right? FOMO, the fear of missing out, is a negative valence state. It feels bad. And to satisfy that pain, to relieve that internal trigger, the solution is found with this app in my pocket. Instagram wins. Okay? So that's the trigger phase. Next comes the action phase. The action phase of the hook is defined as the simplest behavior done in anticipation of a reward. The simplest thing the user can do to get relief from that pain point, from that internal trigger. Now, I'm going to show you a few habit-forming products, and I want you to notice just how simple these key actions are. Something as simple as a scroll on Pinterest, or a search on Google, or what could be simpler than simply pushing the play button on YouTube. These incredibly simple behaviors done in anticipation of an immediate reward. Now, it turns out that we can actually use a formula to predict the likelihood of these singular behaviors. This is a formula that comes to us from a researcher at Stanford by the name of B.J. Fogg. And Fogg tells us that for any human behavior B, we need three things at the same time. We need sufficient motivation. We need sufficient ability. Ability is how easy or difficult something is to do. And we need a trigger to be present. That's what the T stands for, that we just talked all about triggers. So let's dive into these very quickly. Motivation is the energy for action, how much we want to do a particular behavior. And Fogg tells us that we can separate motivation into these 6 key categories because all of us as human beings seek pleasure, avoid pain. We seek hope, we avoid fear. We seek social acceptance, and we avoid social rejection. A lot more to be said about motivation. We don't have time to go too deep into it, but let's move on to the next step of B equals MAT. The A stands for ability. Ability is the capacity to do a particular behavior. And here again, we have these 6 key levers, these 6 attributes of ability that make a user more or less likely to do a behavior based on how difficult it is to do. The harder something is to do, the less likely people are to do it. Based on how much time something takes, how much money something costs, how much physical effort is required. Brain cycles, this is a big one when it comes to technology products because the harder something is to understand, the less likely that user is to do that behavior. Social deviance says that we become more likely to do something when we see other people like us doing it. And finally, non-routine says that we become more likely to do something simply for the fact that we have done so in the past. So habits have this repeater effect. The more we do something, the easier it becomes and the more likely we are to do it in the future. So we can actually plot these 3 attributes on this graph to assess if a behavior is not occurring. Let's say you've built an amazing new website, a wonderful new app, but damn it, people aren't doing the behavior you've designed for them to do. Why not? There are only 3 reasons. Either the user lacks motivation on the y-axis, high motivation, low motivation, or they lack ability. If something is easy to do, it's on the far right. If something is hard to do, it's on the far left, right? High ability, low ability, or the trigger isn't present, okay, for every single human behavior. Let's make this real concrete for you. I want you to think of the last time that a phone rang in your life and you did not pick up the phone. What's a reason? Just yell it out. What's a reason you didn't pick up the cell phone? Yeah.
The caller ID, you know it's a vendor.
Okay, you know it's some telemarketer, you see it on the phone, you have low motivation, even if the phone is right there next to you, high ability, you hear the phone ring, so the trigger is present, you lack motivation, you don't cross that red threshold, the behavior does not occur. What's another reason? It has to do with ability or triggers why you didn't pick up the call. What's another reason? You're busy, all right, fantastic. So maybe you're in the shower, maybe you're listening to me right now. Even if you wanted to pick up the call, high motivation, even if you heard the phone ring, the trigger was present, if you lack ability, if you're way over there on the left, it's too hard to do because you don't want to be that one person who picks up the phone and goes out of the room, right? It's too difficult to pick up the call. You won't pick it up even if you have high motivation because it's too difficult to do. What's one more reason that has to do with a trigger why you may not pick up a call? You didn't hear it. Exactly. The phone was on silent. This happens to me all the time, right? You wanted to pick up the call, high motivation. The phone was right there next to you the whole time, but the phone was on silent. No trigger was present. The takeaway here is that for every behavior you want your customer, your user to take, you have to have all three at the same time. Every click, every interaction, every behavior requires sufficient motivation, ability, and a trigger. Let's do another case study here. How about Twitter? How many of you still use Twitter these days? A lot of you? Oh, almost everybody. Terrific. Okay, so here's Twitter's landing page in 2009. Take a good look. Here's Twitter's landing page in 2010. And here's Twitter today. What kind of theme here? What jumps out at you when I show you the difference between Twitter today versus Twitter back in 2009? What do you kind of notice here about this page? What do you notice? There's a lot more stuff on this page. Look at all the triggers that are on this page, right? What is trigger? Why is trigger? How is a trigger? Watch a video is a trigger. Sign in is a trigger. Click here is a trigger. Click here is a trigger. And get started join is a trigger. Whew, that is a lot of cognitive load the user has to expend to figure out what it is you want them to do on this page, right? And speaking of, what is the intended behavior? What does Twitter, in all three examples, want people to do here, here, and here? What's the intended behavior? Sign in or sign up. That has always been the intended behavior. So what Twitter figured out was, by removing the cognitive clutter, by making it easier for people to take the intended behavior, they became more likely to do it, and they could start sending people through the 4 steps of their hook. Okay? So the lesson here isn't, hey, build a landing page like Twitter. The lesson here is, what's in your customer's way? What can you do to remove as much friction as possible to increase the likelihood of that action occurring? Okay, make sense? All right, so now the 3rd step of the hook, the reward phase. The reward phase is where the itch is scratched. Now, when we talk about rewards, we have to start in the brain. And in particular, an area of the brain called the nucleus accumbens, which was first studied by 2 Canadian researchers by the name of Olds and Milner. And Olds and Milner discovered that when they implanted electrodes inside the brains of lab animals, and they allowed these lab animals to press on a little lever that sent an electrical jolt to this part of the brain, the lab animals wanted to do nothing else. They would forgo food, water, they would run across painful electrified grids just to continue to activate their part of the brain again and again and again. In later experiments done on people, we can't do these kind of experiments anymore, but when they did these kind of experiments on people, they noticed a similar phenomenon, that when people were given a little button to press on, and every time they pressed on this button, they would receive an electrical jolt to their nucleus accumbens, they did so hundreds of times. Some people in the studies had to have the machines forcibly removed from them to get them to stop activating this part of the brain. Well, the good news is we do not have to implant electrodes to activate people's nucleus accumbens because your nucleus accumbens is activated every single day with things like luxury goods, sex, junk food, certain chemicals, and of course right there in the center, our technology. All of these things activate the very same part of the brain. Now for decades, Olds and Milner and the psychology community believed that the purpose of the nucleus accumbens was to stimulate pleasure, right? Why else would lab animals and later people incessantly activate this part of the brain if it wasn't because it felt good, right? Not exactly. Turns out that's not really the case. What we now know that Olds and Milner never did is that the nucleus accumbens does not stimulate pleasure per se. It activates what we call the stress of desire, this wanting, this craving reflex. Because what we now know through fMRI studies is that the nucleus accumbens becomes most active in anticipation of the reward. But when we actually get the thing we want, the thing that's finally going to make us feel good and make us happy, that's when the nucleus accumbens becomes less active. So the way the brain gets us to act is not by stimulating pleasure. It's by creating this itch that we seek to scratch. And did you know that I can tell you a way that you can manufacture desire? Would anybody like to know how to manufacture desire? Anybody curious? I'm doing it to you right now. So when I took that long pause and I asked you a question, some of you perked up. What's this guy doing? Why isn't he talking anymore? What's he going to say next? And it turns out that that variability, that mystery, that unknown is fascinating. It causes us to engage, it causes us to focus, and it is highly habit forming. This, of course, comes from the classic work of B.F. Skinner, the father of operant conditioning. Skinner took these pigeons, he put them in a little box, he gave them a disc to peck at, and every time they would peck at the disc, they would receive a little reward, a little food pellet. And what Skinner learned was that as long as the pigeon was hungry, the experiment didn't work if the pigeon wasn't hungry, but if the pigeon was hungry, that internal trigger was there, he could train the pigeon to peck at the disc every time. That's called operant conditioning. Terrific. But then Skinner started to run out of these little rewards, these food pellets. So he didn't give them every time. He started giving them once in a while. So once in a while, the pigeon would peck at the disc. They would receive a food pellet. The next time the pigeon would peck at the disc, no food pellet was given, no reward. But to Skinner's amazement, what he found was that the rate of response, the number of times that these pigeons pecked at the disc, increased when the reward was given on a variable schedule of reinforcement. Why does that happen? Because variability spikes activity in the nucleus accumbens, creating this desirous response, this craving, this wanting reflex. And so in all sorts of products, both offline and online, whenever you find an experience that's captivating, that engrosses your attention, that you find it difficult to pull yourself away from, you will always find one or more of these three types of variable rewards. Rewards of the tribe, rewards of the hunt, and rewards of the self. Let me introduce these to you briefly. Rewards of the tribe are things that feel good, that come from other people, and have this element of mystery, this bit of variability. Empathetic joy, feeling good because someone else feels good. Competition, cooperation, all of these things feel good, come from other people, and have this element of variability. Best example online is social media, right? When you open up the Facebook app, you're not quite sure what you're going to find. What did people post? What do the comments say? How many likes does something get? High degree of social variability. The next type of variable reward is rewards of the hunt. Rewards of the hunt stem from our primal search for food and other material possessions. And today we buy these things with money. So when people think of variable rewards, they think about casinos, they think about Las Vegas gambling, where the variable reward is the uncertainty of what you might win when you play one of these games of chance. But interestingly enough, we see the exact same psychology at work in our digital devices. Think about LinkedIn or Twitter or Instagram or any number of these services. When you check out the LinkedIn app, maybe the first story is not that interesting, the second's not that interesting, but maybe the third or fourth thing is interesting. And what do I have to do to find more interesting content? What do I have to do? Scrolling. So that scrolling and scrolling works exactly like pulling on a slot machine. Both variable rewards of the hunt. Finally, rewards of the self. Rewards of the self are things that feel good, that have this element of variability, but don't come from other people and aren't about information or monetary rewards. These are things that feel good in and of themselves. They're intrinsically pleasurable. The search for mastery, consistency, competency, and control. Best example online is gameplay, right? So when people love playing Angry Birds or Clash of Clans or any number of these other games, they're not necessarily playing with other people. They're not even necessarily winning anything in terms of material possessions, but there's something fun about getting to the next level, the next achievement, the next accomplishment. And I know everybody here is a very serious business person. None of us play these games, right? But if you're anything like me, you probably play this game every day. Does that look familiar? your email inbox, the mother of habit-forming technology, that need to check that unread messages, the need to check those things in your to-do list, or what gets me every time is that one app notification on my home screen that I just have to open to clear it away. All of those are examples of rewards of the self, the search for mastery, consistency, competency, and control. So the point of these variable rewards is to give the user what they came for, right? To scratch the user's itch and yet leave them wanting more. This bit of mystery around what they might find the next time they open the app, the next time they might use the product. Or some products operate in an inherently variable situation. So for example, Uber and Google wouldn't want to insert variability because there already is variability in that situation. Can I get to where I'm going on time taking an Uber cab? How long will it take me? Am I going to be late for my appointment? Is already variable. What the app wants to do is give you greater agency and control over something that's already variable. Many enterprise applications do exactly that, right? By giving you data, giving you more control, giving you something that helps you control something that feels like it's a little bit out of your control, that's inherently variable. Finally, okay, the last step of the hook is the investment phase. Probably the most overlooked and the biggest opportunity for the future of business, especially connected business, is investment. The investment phase is where the user puts something into the product in anticipation of some kind of future reward, some kind of future benefit. The point of the investment phase is to increase the likelihood of the next pass through the hook in two ways. The first way is by loading the next trigger. So let me give you an example. When I send someone a message on WhatsApp or Slack or any number of other messaging services, when I invest in that platform by sending someone a message, I am loading the next trigger because I'm likely to get a reply. And that reply comes coupled with, what's that little red meatball an example of? It's an example of an external trigger that prompts me through the hook once again. Okay? Not some piece of spammy advertising or some promotional marketing that you're doing, something that I did to bring myself back. That's called loading the next trigger. The second way that investments increase the likelihood of the next pass through the hook is by storing value. Storing value, people, is a really big deal. This is why I love working in the technology industry versus selling physical goods. Because if you think about it, all physical goods depreciate, right? These tables, these chairs, your clothing, everything in the physical world depreciates. It loses value with wear and tear. But consider this, that these habit-forming technologies appreciate. They get better and better and more valuable the more you use them. And they do this because of this principle of what I call stored value. Okay? For example, the more content you upload to Google Drive or Dropbox, the more valuable it becomes to you as your cloud storage solution. The more data you give a product like Mint.com or Facebook or Pinterest, the more data you give these companies, the better the product becomes for you. So if you were to log in to my Pinterest or Facebook account, it wouldn't be that interesting for you, right? It'd be kind of boring because my experience is completely different from yours. It's been tailored using my data. Next is followers. So someone's follower count, for example, on Twitter, is a form of stored value in the form of their follower count. So consider this. If tomorrow Twitter said, hey, sorry, but Twitter's no longer free. Okay, you have to start paying for Twitter. Who's more likely to keep paying for Twitter? Is it going to be someone with 10 followers or 10,000 followers? Of course, it's going to be the person with 10,000 followers because they've stored all this value in the form of their follower count. It's a better way to reach their audience the more followers someone has accrued. And finally, reputation. Reputation is a form of stored value that users can literally take to the bank. Because my reputation on Upwork or eBay or Airbnb dictates what I can charge for my goods and services. And how likely am I to use somebody else's service, even if it's better, once I've stored all this positive reputation on one of these sites? It's kind of hard to leave, right? It's a little bit sticky. Which brings me to this cold, hard conclusion. I want you to listen very careful for something you're not going to like. There is no 11th commandment that says the best product wins. That's a lie. It's not the best product that wins. It's the product that can capture the monopoly of the mind, the thing that we turn to first with little or no conscious thought. That's the product that captures the market. And it's through successive cycles through these hooks, trigger, action, reward, investment, that customer preferences are shaped, that our tastes are formed, and that these habits take hold. So if you're building the kind of product that requires habits, requires unprompted user engagement, you've got to be able to answer these 5 fundamental questions of, number 1, what's the internal trigger that your user wants to scratch with your product? What's the external trigger that gets your user to the service? What's the simplest behavior done in anticipation of a reward? Is the reward fulfilling and yet leaves the user wanting more? And then finally, what's the bit of work that the user does to increase their likelihood of the next pass through the hook? Now, before we take a couple questions, I think we have a little bit of time, there's one more thing I feel obliged to address, which is the morality of manipulation. I know what that nervous laughter's about, right? That many of you during this presentation are thinking to yourselves, oh, you know, is this kosher? Like, is this all right to do to people, to use their hidden psychology to get them to do stuff? Is that all right? And if you had that reaction, I say bravo. I think that is the appropriate humane response to hearing about the power of these habit-forming technologies. Because let's face it, anytime we are changing people's behaviors to meet our ends in mind, especially commercial ends, that is a form of manipulation. So we have to be very responsible and careful about how we use these techniques, because these are the products that people take to bed with them every night. It's the first thing we reach for in the morning before we even say hello to our loved ones. So we as product designers, as investors, as employees, we have to ask ourselves, how do we responsibly use these techniques for good? And what I encourage you to do is to pick one of the world's problems to fix. You know, that is one thing that we have no shortage of. And just to show you that I put my money where my mouth is, I want to show you an example of a company that uses these hooks for good. A few years ago, a guy by the name of Glenn Moriarty out of Virginia Beach called me up. Glenn is a psychotherapist. He read my book and he said, Nir, I really like what you're doing. Here's my hook. Okay? I know that far too many people don't get the therapy that they need. Right? He services a community of war vets suffering from PTSD, parents of children with a disability, or just anybody when they're feeling down and need someone to talk to. He knows that traditional psychotherapy is expensive, it's difficult to get. There's a lot of barriers, a lot of those ability things are lacking to get people to get the services they need. So he says, here's my app. It's called 7 Cups. And he walks me through his hook. The internal trigger is feeling down. It's needing someone to connect to. The action phase is to take out your phone, and with one click, doesn't cost a dime, you're instantly connected to another person who's ready to listen. The variable rewards are rewards of the tribe, connecting to another human being. And the investment phase, and here's where it gets really interesting. The more you use a product like 7 Cups, you're trained as someone who originally came to be listened to, you're trained on how to be a listener yourself. And you start using this service to help others. And those people who use that service get better, not just a little bit better, dramatically better. This free app that services 140,000 languages, 80,000 sessions a week, has been shown to be as effective as traditional psychotherapy. Talk about the amazing power of using habit-forming technologies for good. And with that, I encourage you, allow me to take liberties with the words of Gandhi and encourage you to build the change that you wish to see in the world. Thank you very much. Thank you. I would love to take maybe a couple questions real quick. And while we do that, I have a quick favor to ask. Can everybody please hold up their phones for me? Hold your phones up for me for a quick minute. What I want you to do, this is for 2 reasons. One, I want to grab a quick picture of you if I can figure out how to use my new phone, which is not cooperating. I want to take a quick picture of you for my Instagram page because this is a beautiful audience. Thank you. The second reason I just did that was because now that you have the phone in your hands, I just increased your ability. I made it easier to take the intended behavior, which is to go to that URL, www.opinion2.us. There you will find a very short survey, just 5 questions, a bunch of radio buttons. I would love to hear what you thought of the presentation. I'm constantly tweaking it based on your feedback. Please hold your phone horizontally, not vertically. It'll make it easier to take the survey. And when you click submit, you'll be given a link to my SlideShare page where you can have all the slides you just saw so you can keep them, share them, do whatever you'd like with them. You want to look for the presentation that says Hooked Model. There's a lot of presentations there, but the one you want that I showed you today is called Hooked Model. Okay? And if I don't get to your question, my website is nirandfar.com. I have a contact me form there. I also do free office hours if you need one-on-one advice. Happy to do that as well. And with that, do we have time for a couple questions? Is that all right? Terrific. Questions, questions. Please.
When you talk about triggers and the examples, I tend to think about things we use constantly, like checking email every day or Twitter dozens of times a day. Can you give me an example of maybe a successful app that someone doesn't need to use every day or every week, yet the habit is still formed?
Right. So frequency is the #1 killer of habit-forming products, or lack of frequency, I should say. By the way, I'm going to pass out these little hook stickers. Some people like to put them on their laptop so they can refer to it. It's got the 4 steps. So I'm going to pass this around. Hopefully, there might not be enough, but hopefully it'll make its way around. Thank you. So the #1 problem I see where I look at a company, and about half the time I see a company that comes to me for some advice, and I say, this is not going to become a habit because it doesn't meet the frequency test. Now, Larry Page from Google calls it the Toothbrush Test. He only wants Google to invest in products that are used at least twice a day, like a toothbrush. That's how much he believes in this frequency paradigm. I say that the research is not quite so extreme. Actually, the research shows it's about once a week. That if your user is not using a product within at least a week's time or less, it's very difficult to form a new user habit. So what do? What if you're selling the kind of product that just is not used with sufficient frequency? It reminds me, a few months ago, I was at a convention of real estate agents. And I got on stage, kind of like I got up here today, and the woman who introduced me, who hired me, said, now we are going to hear from an expert on habit formation. Nir Eyal is going to teach us how to make home buying and selling into a habit. And I went to the podium and I said, look, I'm very sorry. You will never, ever make home buying and selling into a habit because it doesn't occur with sufficient frequency. Right? It's something people do every 5, 10 years, if ever. And it's the antithesis of a habit. It's not something that we do with little or no conscious thought. It's something that we tend to overthink, right? So what do? There are 2 solutions. If you can't make your product itself into a habit, what you do is you bolt on other things that are habit forming. And I'll give you 2 examples. The 2 C's, content and community. Content and community. So one company that had this problem was Williams-Sonoma. Williams-Sonoma, you know, they sell cookware and all kinds of kitchen items. They know that people do not buy cookware with sufficient frequency to ever make it into a habit. So what did? They took the content strategy. They built a website called Taste, which has been consistently awarded one of the best cooking websites on the web, just so happens to be brought to you by Williams-Sonoma, and they have gotten people into the habit of checking for interesting new content 2 or 3 times a day. They're sharing recipes and interviews and articles about things that might interest their customers. And what they realize is this mantra that I keep repeating again and again, I'd love for you to write it down, which is that monetization is a result of engagement. Monetization is a result of engagement, meaning that Williams-Sonoma knows that if you have built a relationship with the company through their content, when it does come time to buy something new for the kitchen, who are you going to buy it from? From them, right? The second strategy is community. Community is another way that you can bolt on a habit onto a product that's not used with sufficient frequency. Good case study here is the Hallmark Keepsake Ornament Club. Is anybody by chance a member of the Hallmark Keepsake Ornament Club? Nobody here? No, sometimes you'll get a person or two. Believe it or not, there are 300,000 Americans who are members of the Hallmark Keepsake Ornament Club. Now, Christmas ornaments are something that will never become a habit, right? You only buy Christmas ornaments once a year, right? Maybe if that. So what did Hallmark do? They created this community around their product. Did you know, in the middle of August, if you go to Hallmark stores, when they have a new shipment of ornaments, you will see a line out the door in the middle of August. It's a privilege. I know you're going to get very excited about this. It's one of the privileges of the Hallmark Keepsake Ornament Club that if you're a member and they get a new shipment of ornaments, even if it's in the middle of August, you are invited to help unpack those ornaments. I know. Very exciting. Don't all rush to join. To you, that probably sounds like free labor, but for the members of that club, it's a huge privilege. It's not about the ornaments. It's about the fact that Gladys and Bob and Bill will all be there, and those are my friends. That's my community. So they bolted on this community aspect, and other sites do this as well, around the product that is not used with sufficient frequency to become a habit in and of itself. Okay, make sense? Okay, Rand.
How do you break a habit of a competitor?
Oh, that's a good question, Rand. So Rand asked, so let's say you have a new product and you understand your internal trigger is boredom, uncertainty, fatigue, whatever it might be, but somebody else already owns that habit. What do you do about that? It's great if you're the incumbent, right? Habits are very hard to break. They can create a lot of market value. But what if you're the upstart wanting to break that existing habit? There are 4 ways to do this. 4 ways to do this. The first way to capture the competition's customer habit is to increase velocity through the hook. Velocity through the hook. If you can take people faster, trigger action, reward, investment faster than the incumbent, that's one way. That's how Netflix won. If you remember back in the day when Netflix was taking on Blockbuster, right? You'd come home after a long day. The internal trigger was fatigue, was after work, you just want to chill out, relax with a movie or something after work. You'd have to go to the store, right? Get in your car, go to the store, find the Blockbuster, find the film, take it off the shelf, see if they have it in stock, give them your card, pay for it, drive back home, and put it into the DVD player. Netflix, back in the day, now it's even easier, but back in the day, remember those red envelopes? You'd come home from work, look at that, a red envelope waiting on my kitchen counter. All I have to do is pick it up, put it in the DVD player. Okay? Sometimes I didn't really even want to watch that movie, but it's right there, right? It was in my queue. It's so easy to do. It's right there and ready. So that's how Netflix beat Blockbuster. They had greater velocity to get from internal trigger to relief, to the reward. So increase velocity through the hook. The second way is frequency through the hook. So number 1 is velocity. Number 2 is frequency. If you can be the company that engages with people more often throughout their day, that's another opportunity to beat the incumbent. And this typically happens when there's an interface change. Okay? So when we went from desktop to laptop to mobile devices and now to wearable and audible devices like the Amazon Echo or the Google Home device, every time there's an interface change, the habit deck gets reshuffled. And the incumbents tend not to be able to come over to that new platform as quickly as a new upstart. Why? Because suddenly, these new devices are more ubiquitous. So take Instagram. Why did Facebook pay $1 billion for Instagram? Because Instagram was a mobile-first product. And you could check Instagram way more often, back in the day when they bought the company, way more often than a desktop product that you could only use in your dorm room or at home or in the office. Right? You could go through that hook more often throughout your day. So velocity, frequency. The third way is to make the reward more rewarding. If you can be the kind of product that makes the reward way better. There was a Harvard Business Review article that found that the reward has to be 9 times better than the incumbent in order to get past that friction of breaking the habit. So that's the third way. The reward has to be way, way, way better. The fourth way is easier entry into the hook. So let me explain this one. Does anybody know who the largest enterprise software, the most popular enterprise software in the world is today? What's the most popular enterprise software today? Google Docs. Google Docs is the most widely used enterprise software in the world. A few years ago, it used to be Microsoft Office. How did Microsoft Office lose out to Google Docs? Well, if you remember back in the day when Google Docs was brand new, there was a few big advantages. It was all in the cloud, so you didn't have to buy a disk that you have to shove in your computer, and it was free. So if I'm a college student and I want to write a term paper, or I'm a startup founder and I just need to put together a slide presentation, I could go buy all that clunky software, or I could just use Google Docs even though it did a fraction of what Microsoft Office could do. So it became easier to get into the hook in the first place. They also broke the investment phase, right? Because it's interoperable, right? I could take PowerPoint and I could put it into Google Docs and now it works. They killed Google Docs investment phase. Now there was no more stored value. I could put it anywhere. Okay? So velocity, frequency, make the reward more rewarding, or easier entry into the hook. Those are your opportunities. Okay? Well, it was really fun. If you have more questions, I'll be around. Thank you.